Workshop into session, and board members and superintendent, as usual, we'll go through each item on the agenda, and if you have questions or if you have staff, superintendent, presentations and so forth, please just let me know. I'll go fast, but I'll also try to pause after each item so that if you have anything, colleagues, you can bring it up at that time, and same to you, superintendent. All right, of course, Section 1 is opening of the meeting. Section 2 is the approval of the agenda. Section 3.1 will be recognition of Tenta Owens 2018-2019 Florida Panhandle and Big Bend Region 1 Outstanding Senior School Volunteer, presented by the superintendent. 3.2, recognition of Crestview High School boys basketball team, Florida State Athletic Association Class 7A Champions 2019, presented by the superintendent. And then Section 3.3, recognition of 2018-2019 Kids Tag Art Program winners, presented by Mr. Ben Anderson, Okaloosa County Tax Collector. Section 4.1, we have a visitor, Mr. Drew Espy from the All Sports Association, presenting a donation to Silver Sands School. Section 5, public comment, we don't yet know. Section 6, administrative and personnel appointments. So here we go. 6.1 will be the appointment of a foreman for maintenance, recommended by the superintendent for approval. 6.2 will be the appointment of a specialist, human resources investigations, recommended by the superintendent for approval. 6.3, appointment of Director 1, Secondary Education, recommended by the superintendent for approval. 6.4, appointment of Principal, Bruner Middle School, recommended by the superintendent for approval. 6.5, appointment of Principal, Meigs Middle School, recommended by the superintendent for approval. And then 6.6, appointment of Assistant Principal 1, Choctawhatchee High School, recommended by the superintendent for approval.
And Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I would respectfully request on item 6.6,
Right.
if you would consider approving a cost-neutral double fill for that position.
Okay. All right. So that will be an action that we would do Monday night.
Yes.
Okay. And so that there would be a recommendation of a motion, and I see it's on there on the agenda, to approve the appointment there. I believe that's on there.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yep. All right, so Section 7, committee and staff reports, workshop only. 7.1, in-county travel paid for the period of March 21 through April the 3rd, 2019, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. 7.2, out-of-county travel paid for the period of March 21 through April the 3rd, 2019, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. 7.3, quarterly report service agreements under $5,000 threshold for internal and budgetary funds, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director, Purchasing. And then 7.4, quarterly report short-term facility use contracts and lease agreements under the $5,000 threshold, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director, Purchasing. All right, so moving on to consent agenda, 8.1 will be approval. 8.2, approval of the minutes of the student disciplinary hearing of April the 4th, 2019. Minutes of the workshop meeting of April the 4th, 2019. Minutes of the regular meeting of April the 8th, 2019, all recommended by Superintendent Chambers for approval. 8.3, appropriation of District 2 School Board Member Capital Outlay Funds to Fort Walton Beach High School for tables for instruction and testing in the amount of $4,998, presented by Mr. Dewey Destin and recommended by Superintendent Chambers for approval. 8.4, appropriation of District 2 School Board Member Capital Outlay Funds to Silver Sands School for self-help track facility resurface upgrade in the amount of $15,000, presented by Mr. Dewey Destin and recommended by Superintendent Chambers for approval. 8.5, appropriation of District 4 School Board Member Capital Outlay Funds to Silver Sands School for self-help track facility resurface upgrade in the amount of $5,000, presented by Mr. Tim Bryan and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.6, self-help project track resurface upgrade at Silver Sand School, presented by Dr. Bill Smith, specialist, facilities planning and maintenance, and recommended by the superintendent for approval.
Dr. White,
Yes,
if I could, Dr. Smith, I know you'll have the answer for this, so I know I'm not putting you on the spot, but could you kind of explain to the general public the kind of surface we're going to put down there? Of course, this will be one of the more advanced surfaces. I'm taking it right.
It's a high-grade asphalt track that we used to overlay. We also treat the tracks that are in the existing asphalt that's there to give them a new surface to run on, and of course the striping will follow. But it'll give them back to original what they originally had.
Okay.
And it's off a district-wide contract that we have.
All right, thank you, sir, and I do apologize.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Thank you, Mr. Bryan. All right, so moving on to 8.7, self-help project pole barn structure over the batting cages at Baker School, presented by Dr. Bill Smith, specialist, facilities planning and maintenance, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.8, budget amendment number 7, fiscal year 2018-2019, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.9, monthly financial statement for March 2019, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.10, invoices to be approved for payment, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.11, school donations, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the superintendent for approval.
Dr. White, if I can.
Yes, sir.
Again, as always, thank you to our community partners who help give money to the schools to support various projects and opportunities for our students, and we do appreciate our community support.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. All right, 8.12, payroll warrant register and accounts payable warrant register for March 2019 totaling $26,148,960.26, and bank transfers for March 2019 totaling $3,145,000, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.13, proposed school operational support staffing grid and school supplement grid discretionary budget for fiscal year 2018-2020, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the superintendent for approval.
I do have some comments.
All right, so Mr. Chambers, you'd like for Ms. Scallon to come up, or however you want to approach that, and you have some comments or questions?
Okay.
So do you want me to start?
Well, I guess so. All right,
All
go
right.
ahead.
So in the interim between yesterday when we heard about this being added and this morning, I've spoken to 6 or 7 principals who will be impacted or whose colleagues will be impacted by this staffing approach. And most all of them feel strongly that the loss of an assistant principal at the elementary level would do great damage to their programs that they have now, not just instructionally, but disciplinary-wise too, particularly in a time when we're asking so much more of our school principals and when they are growing, the schools are growing, and the discipline issues are so different than those we've encountered in times past in this school district or in any other school district. And the sense is that an assistant principal operates much like an SRO, and we've said, you've heard me say many times, that I wouldn't want to be a school principal today without an SRO. And a lot of their impactiveness and their effectiveness is due to the fact that they spend time getting to know our students and building a rapport with the students, with the communities, and with the parents. And because they have that rapport with the students then do not want to disappoint that trusted adult, so they're able to keep the discipline in line in that role too, and be a bridge into the communities. So they would recommend that if you could cut anywhere else besides the school base, they would be so appreciative of that. And and looking at getting the return on their investment, respectfully, every single one of these people respectfully suggest that the district staff could be cut more deeply in order that those resources could be pushed back to the schools. And even in saving the position, put the person at the school to help with school abilities at the school. And one person, echoed by a couple of others, said in the professional development arena, they could see losing positions in that arena, and that would save on reduction in costs with the subs that are having to put in place every time there's that event. Not to diminish the value out of that, but to understand that we can get some of that value back in free resources that are offered through avenues like Fiddlers and Finn and others. And we understand that in budget crisis, every cow is a sacred cow to its mother. And I would say that when I was a district level director and when I was a principal. And having been on the receiving end of both, as a district level director, at times being asked to cut my own staff, I know that's hard. It's incredibly hard on a number of levels. And at the school base, having positions cut too, when I was a principal at all three of my schools, had to deal with that. So I know that everything you look at is critical, and I admire you and certainly Rita for having to face that. I know that when you're up against a wall, you have to make cuts somewhere, and someone has to, for lack of a better term, suck it up and be the good soldier and take it on the chin. But I really have to be an advocate for our school-based people, our school-based principals and teachers, and say that if we can keep the cuts away from the principals and the teaching staff, then it would be my recommendation that we do that. Thank you for hearing me.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. And I do appreciate that. And I think, first of all, I think we know we have some fantastic principals in the school
We
district.
do.
We have fantastic assistant principals in the school district as well. And just like some of you on the board here, you've been assistant principals and principals, as have I. This decision is something that hasn't come lightly. We spent a lot of time discussing this. And though the district budgets will not come before you today, as you know, historically they come later. But I will say, district is where we looked at absolutely first. So I agree with you, Dr. Kelly. We do want to keep as many of the cuts away from the school level, which is why we very much started at the district level. I think you'll see when we come to you with the district budget, I think that you will see a reduction in district in the tune of about $1 million. You'll see also with ESC being a priority this year, and we're there for the DOE report. I think you'll see an increase in staff in ESC. So those are two factors there. I very much believe that the cuts need to come as far away from the schools as possible. But I'll also say, when you look at this upcoming budget that is coming, and I'm going to ask Rita in a second to share some information about the budget, but when you look at the budget that's coming, we all know that last year, I believe the amount, and I could be speaking wrong, it was about 47 cents of an increase, which I think we all were a little disappointed, to say the least, with that increase. This year, when you shave back some things, I think we've talked about there's potentially about a $49, depending on which budget you look at, of an increase. The majority of the increase in the proposed budgets that are coming are Invest in Brightest and Turnaround Supplemental Services. So when you look at the amount of money that's going to come to districts next year, potentially, because that piece is not done, but we have to be prepared, we're probably not going to receive the amount of money that we would like. When you look at the base student allocation since 2007, we've in essence gone up $40.95. When you look at the base student allocation as it pertains to also the consumer price index, the base student allocation is here, the consumer price index is up here. When you go further and look at that, in essence, the consumer price index has gone up almost 20%, but funding in terms of the base student allocation has gone up 0.97%. And I say all that, and Ms. Gallen can go a lot more specifically and a lot more intimately into that. I say all that to say because difficult decisions have to be made. I think there was a point in time in this district where we didn't have some APs at the elementary level. Now, I do believe that we do need to have APs at the elementary level. Sometimes in difficult times, we do need to make some difficult decisions. So just to kind of recap, you will see reductions at the district level. But if we're going to make some adjustments, for example, whether it be instructionally or ed support, I do think that we also need to be sure that we're looking at administration as well.
Okay,
And if you don't mind, Rita, if you'd come up and give some more specifics.
And while she's doing that, I guess the reality is we have declining revenue and increased cost. And I know that the board members know this. Members of the public, though, might be interested to know that it's the superintendent's duty to present to this school board a balanced budget. That's what he has to do. And Mr. McInnes, what does the law say about the school board in passing a budget? It must be.
Right. The superintendent has a legal duty to recommend to you a balanced budget, and then any budget you adopt must also be balanced. Once the budget is presented by the superintendent in a balanced format, then it does become the board's budget to work from, but then you're bound to also adopt a balanced budget.
So, how I've seen this happen before is that the superintendent, and of course the staffing grid, as we know, is all preparation for him to present a balanced budget. And when you spend roughly 90% of every dollar, 90 cents of every dollar on personnel costs, when it comes time to balance that budget, the sad reality is exactly as it's been presented. Now, it may be that once that budget is presented to us, that you may have some other ideas of things that you would prefer to cut. But in my mind, from the budget figures I've seen, sadly, we're not going to be in the position of adding staff. I think we're going to be in another position. I'm sorry to take so long. Mr. Chambers?
Okay, I passed out some information to you, and then I'm going to be brief today and kind of summary level, and of course at some other time I can get into more specific details, or if you have questions, y'all can certainly call me. But to echo what the superintendent said, the budget process is about a 3-month period. The legislature has not adjourned, and we do not know for certain how much revenue we will get or in what categories we will get it. However, we as a district cannot wait until the legislature adjourns and then start building a budget. So we have to start building a budget now. And as part of building that budget, we have to look at the first page I gave you is it has 4 columns, and it basically takes what our current funding is today, compares it to what the governor's proposal is, compares it to what the House budget proposal is, and the Senate budget is, okay? So if you look across there, and again, I'm just going to hit on some key points. Line number 9 is the BSA. So if you look at the governor's budget, he's proposing about a $50 per student increase in operational dollars. And when I say operational dollars, those are your most flexible dollars that you can use for raises in personnel, increases in benefits, increases in operating costs, increases or initiatives of particular programs. So that $50 from the governor's budget, that's what that would have to encompass. The House is $38, okay, and then the Senate is they're at $109. However, if you look at this, two of your proposals, so 2/3 of your proposal is between $38 and $50. So the odds and the likelihood are that you are gonna wind up around that amount. Now, with that being said, the first thing you have to deal with is, before you do anything else, is an increase in Florida retirement system. So, out of the governor's budget or the House budget, one of them would generate about $1.72 million, one would generate about $1.32 million overall in operating to us. $600,000 of that increase is $600,000 of that's absorbed by the increase in Florida retirement system. That is without doing one thing. That is based on the salaries of our current employees, and as Dr. White said, the majority of our budget is personnel, so we have to deal with that. And so then you have to deal with things like increases in health insurance. Well, we know that increases in health insurance have been running about 10 to 12%. So that's north of $2 million. So right there, you're at about $2.6 million. That is without looking at anything else. That's without looking at utilities. That's without looking at increases in supplies. That's without looking at programs that you need. And we all know that we have gone through about 11-year period where funding has been inadequate for school districts. And so we, when I say we, the district superintendent, school board, have struggled, and it's been a challenge to continue to provide the level of service that Okaloosa County does to their students with the limited funding that we get, and also without having to reduce staff in the classroom, without having to reduce employees' pay, without having to send employees home, and that we can be proud of as a district. In the last 11 years that we have not had to do that. But at some point, you cannot sustain that without getting some additional revenue. So that is why, beginning with the school budget, and as the superintendent said, we have spent hours and struggled with keeping it as far away from the classroom as we possibly can. But this is what is causing us to have to look at those decisions and make the decisions or the proposals that you may see. And so, with that being said, there are some other dollars that are proposed in the budgets, but again, as I've said many times, they are in categorical, specifically restricted sources of revenue. Mental health allocation, which is a good thing. However, for operational purposes, it doesn't give us any flexibility. Safe schools. And I know that out there is the conversation that the Senate budget is so much more than the House or the governor's. But if you look at the two blue lines, line 32 and line 33 on this analysis, you'll see that what's happening is that revenue that was outside of the FEFP, okay, and again, these were flow-through dollars, best and brightest. It wasn't anything, it just flowed to the district. We paid it out based on the direction of the state. That was outside of the FEFP calculation. This year, they are proposing to include that best and brightest in the FEFP calculation, which what that does is that bumps up the amount that is reflected as dollars per student. But it's not an increase in dollars per student, because you're just shifting it from outside the FEFP into the FEFP. So it gives an inflated look at thinking that we're getting, significantly more. So, and then also there's line 32, that's a turnaround supplemental service. And that's added to the amount per student. And so that'll be restricted and specific purpose, okay? And then all the peach-colored lines are the ones where the House and the Senate are in agreement, so pretty much what you can bank on is that those dollars will wind up in those areas with that amount, okay? Okay, the second page, and I have a number 2 on it. This is just giving you a visual of what Mr. Chambers mentioned to you about the BSA. If you look at it in 07-08, it was $4,163.47. And today, currently, it's $4,204.42. So that line that I've drawn across there, you can see that, you know, again, we are not much better off revenue-wise than we were 11 years ago. However, as you can imagine, our costs have increased, okay? And the third page, again, this is just another visual to what the superintendent mentioned. You see in 07-08, started off the BSA and including the CPI, were even. Okay, so you can see over the 11 years what we actually received versus if we had received an increase relative to the Consumer Price Index. Okay, and the Consumer Price Index, of course, is the index that tracks the average of increases throughout the year in cost. Okay. And so then if you flip over to page 4, this page, what I tried to do was show you, and again, to ditto what the superintendent said and give you a visual. You can see, same thing with the BSA, from where we were 11 years ago to where we are today, we have received less than a 1% increase in revenue. However, if you go over to the last column, that says projected expenditure increase based on the CPI, over that 11-year period, there's been a 20% increase in cost. So that is what brings us to where we are today, that we have to look at ways that we are able to reduce and or repurpose existing revenue for other much needed programs like Mr. Chambers had mentioned about the ESC program, and I know in working with the staff that we are looking at significant cuts at the district level, trying to keep it as far away from the classroom as we can, and also trying to shift resources to more resources to the ESC programs beyond what we generate in revenue in conjunction with IDEA.
Mr. Destin? Yes, I think, sir.
Well, you know, I feel for superintendent trying to split the baby here and have the baby survive. The proposed operational support staffing is kind of the base that he starts with for the budget. So at this point, I support where he's going, but there may be a lot of changes, because I understand what Dr. Kelly is saying also, and I've not looked into the cuts we've made on the other side, where we're trying to avoid driving it down to the school level, to be able to say I am satisfied with those. So my guess is there's going to be a lot of gnashing of teeth over this before we get a final budget, but he has to start somewhere.
Yes, sir.
So, you know,
Mr. Bryan?
that's the position we're in.
Yes, and
I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Destin.
And I will say the same what Mr. Destin and Dr. Kelly said. My biggest concern is that when you're splitting up an assistant principal between two schools, you know, what happens at one school one day when that assistant principal's there, and then they're supposed to be at another school the next day, but then something arises at the school that they might be at. That was my concern, my biggest concern, and I also look at the component of grooming assistant principals into that next position of leadership. As we know, as everybody knows, not just in the school setting, but across the board, you know, finding qualified and teachers, finding qualified people who want to go into administration. That's becoming hard. And as Dr. Kelly said, in today's environment, I was never a school principal. I was never a teacher. But in the private sector, that assistant working under me was very much a part of helping me run the day-to-day operations of the business that I was in, and not having that person there to be supportive when I wasn't in the store, that could take a lot. So that was my concern. I understand the superintendent, bless you, you do have a lot on your plate right now, but I'm looking at it from that point of view. But I also would like to say to Ms. Scallon, you always talk about peeling the onion back. And of course, when you peel the onion back, what happens? The tears start flowing. But I appreciate what you do to try to explain to, not just to us, but to the people that are watching these videos or in the general public right now, or the audience. So we do thank you for all that you do. And we know, when you have a smile on your face, it makes me feel good, but I know you work hard to try to, to do what's best for the school district. But you tell it like it is, and sometimes we don't want to hear it.
And the thing that I would add is that, board members, you'll see here that we have in front of us a recommended motion by the superintendent of schools. And how critical is it that this document or some document be approved so that you can move forward in making the budget?
It is critical, and in fact, last year was about the same time, but in previous years it was, we did this in March because it impacts schools making decisions, it impacts hiring teachers, it impacts the entire school level to get this approved and to get moving, and for them to get their budget packets and for them to be able to start developing.
All right. And then the other thing I thought about when I saw this is that, and there's some of you that remember this, we used to be site-based at these schools, and schools could make decisions about how they wanted to spend the money that they earned. And so it might be that, I know we say we've moved to a hybrid model. It might be that schools may come up, or the district may provide some kind of alternative funding formula where they could make some of these kinds of decisions. Because in some cases, a school may say, well, I'd like to have both, but since I have to pay, I'm going to pay for a reading teacher as opposed to an assistant principal. But I guess really the only one that's site-based anymore, for all intents and purposes, is the superintendent and his staff, because they have to try to do this for the entire school district and make the numbers work. And I have some compassion for you in that respect, as these other board members have said. All right.
And I'd like to add on
Sure.
to that piece. And so Dr. Kelly, Dr. White, and really members of the board, a lot of you remember when we were site-based. So I was a principal when we were site-based. And so we right now are in a centralized model. And of course, me coming into this position on January 11th, so there's been a lot of discussions that have been had as it pertains to school level budgets. And should we, at one point in time, go back to where things are site-based? I think the vast majority of our principals right now haven't been a part of that model. But have we had discussions about moving that needle more towards a site-based model or a hybrid? We have. I very much believe that our school principals should be able to make some decisions as it pertains to their school and as it pertains to their staff. Going back to coming into the position on January 11th, let's just say that we went to a site-based model for the 2019-20 school year. So you can imagine right now what that would do to a system in terms of HR, in terms of positions, in terms of bump and roll, in terms of layoff. And the last thing that I would want to do is cause some discomfort right now to a system. So we are in the model that we're in. We are trying to give our principals, even in this upcoming school year, some flexibility with some positions that maybe they haven't had in the past. And I just go back to, and I appreciate this discussion, and because believe me, I've definitely had some sleepless nights, and we've had some long senior staff meetings discussing this. I wish we were in a situation where we were funded adequately to where we could have the positions that we believe that we need for our students, for our teachers, for our schools. Unfortunately, difficult decisions have to be made, and I get it, that in essence, even though it's a team approach, it becomes my decision that I bring to you. I clearly understand that there'll be people who will understand those decisions, and there'll be some who maybe they will not understand those decisions, but I understand that.
I have something,
Sure.
please. So we're being asked to vote on this, but we're not seeing where the cuts are being made at the administrative level. So we're having to vote on this first, right?
The staffing grid.
Right. But have we seen what cuts are being made on the, away from the school part? Have we seen that?
So I'll ask Ms. Scallon to come up. So departmentally, as you know, so not only this year, this is the process that we've gone through for numerous years, where the staffing grid comes first, and then the departments come after that. So that's something that's already been in place and that we're continuing with.
Well, you know, I'm new. This is my first go-round on the budget. But if we're having to vote on this, but we haven't seen the other cuts, then I'm just, I'm questioning, how do I vote on this cutting from the classroom when I haven't seen what's going to be cut at the other part? So maybe you can help me with that.
And what happens is, because it is a comprehensive budget, we have to do it in portions. And the first part is to get the schools out there where they can hire and make some decisions. But you will have the opportunity, because we have various budget meetings. We have the preliminary tentative budget meeting, and the final budget is not adopted until September. So once that budget is delivered to y'all, and the superintendent, I'm sure, is going to provide you information and proposals along the way, but once that budget is presented to you in the preliminary and tentative form, then that becomes it's your budget under your purview, and if you wanted to change something at that time, you can certainly change it. But there is, and I always hesitate to say there's not a way to do it, but in this instance, I have to say there is not a way to give you a balanced budget up front in April when we don't even know for sure what we're going to get in May, and all of the decisions that have to be made. This is one time I have to say, I do not know how you could ever do that.
But my concern is that on the splitting an assistant principal, once we vote on that, we're not going to be able to change it when the budget is finalized. You're saying we could go back and change it?
You can always make adjustments to budgets.
Right. You may find something else you'd rather cut. And you
And
can propose that.
Absolutely.
We've done that before.
But if we've already voted on this,
You just modify
Right.
you make another vote and say, I'm going to give back whatever it was that you may get a consensus that you want to do. So you still have that option of adjusting the budget
all the way to
all the way to September. And to tell you honestly, you have that option throughout the entire year, because a budget is a budget for a moment in time. It's fluid. It's just like I bring to you a budget amendment each month, and
Right.
there's adjustments in there. So it's a fluid document, and it can change from day to day, but from board meeting to board meeting.
But it's a good question.
Yes,
Mr. Vanchek,
yes, it is.
Because by law, the superintendent is tasked with presenting us a balanced budget.
right.
And that's what they're working toward. Then, on the backside of that, if there are some ideas that we have that we'd like to make changes to, as long as it balances. And that's the tough part.
I just-
then that can happen.
If I could just reiterate, I do understand the process, having been through it many decades. I understand. I've been through the site-based model, I've been through the district centralized model, and a hybrid model. So I think I understand how that works, but respectfully, asking 6 schools to share 3 assistant principals and to have those 3 people be effective at any one of their schools while trying to alleviate some of the burden of discipline and teacher evaluation on the part of the principal, I don't think is the best move. I'd rather see those 3 others made whole again and see 3 more cuts at the district level to balance that out. That's just an humble opinion from a former principal who has talked
Well-
to 7 of our colleagues.
Yeah, did you look at anything else that could be cut besides assistant principals? I mean, I'm not,
So,
you know.
of course, right
We
now,
have a
I'm-
lot of different coaches' positions.
Correct.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but they're out there. Did we look at that?
So we've probably spent about 8 weeks on this, and we've definitely looked at a number of factors, and then also the source of the funding, as you know, also makes a
Right.
makes a difference. So I could say, hey, we're going to do this, but that source of funding doesn't help us in our general dollars. So the thing that I appreciate, that I said the very first board meeting, that this is a school board, and I'm the superintendent, and we're going to work collaboratively. So this discussion right here, I appreciate. This staffing grid, as you know, that you see in front of you, there's a whole lot of numbers on here. And we're talking about this one item, which is important, but it's one item amongst this whole staffing grid. So I appreciate the fact that you're looking at it at this level. So I hear you.
Thank you.
So I hear you.
And I know that this is challenging. I'm not saying that it's not, but I think it's one of those things that it looks good on paper to do this, but in reality, I think it's going to be way challenging for those schools to share that employee. I think it just doesn't work from my experience as a educator for a long time, not as an administrator, but even as a teacher. I think someone's going to not be able to get serviced, and ultimately, I don't think that's going to be good for the students. The other thing is, it's one of those situations, we all know times when we didn't have an SRO. We all know the times when, we didn't have these APs. But once you do, taking it back, that's a lot harder than not having it. And I just think they're vital. The way of the world, the way things are now, I've had some of those principals talk to me and say the discipline piece and different things that they have to do has become such a task that they need that person there. They cannot handle everything. So I really am struggling with thinking that this is good for us to have this. And I know you've worked hard on this. Believe me, I understand, so.
Chairman, if I may, just
Yes, sir.
one further comment. We're looking at an excess of probably $1 million to institute the recommendations on ESE that we got from the report that we listened to at the last meeting. So there's going to be a big hole in this budget. And we've got to figure out how to fill it. I've always been a strong proponent of site-based management and budgeting because it gives the schools the flexibility. And if I remember correctly, as we moved out of site-based, we had $3 million that the schools had saved, and that could have fixed this problem. However, because of the timing of the transition we've had with our superintendent, Mr. Chambers, did not have the time to try to move back toward that model. Next year, I hope that we make some strong decisions to do that. But let's not fool ourselves. When we adopt this proposed operational support staffing, we put the framework in place for the budget. We can fight at the peripheries, but if we take it apart, then the budget's going to collapse.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at with this now. This is a proposed motion that can be modified at Monday's meeting, for that matter. So if there are some ideas that along those lines, that's the time to do it. But I do respect and admire the attempt that Mr. Chambers has made to try to solve this dilemma, because
Absolutely.
there's just a very big, large hole in the money, and we must do a balanced budget. So I admire he and the staff for working at it. But if there are some ideas floating around that end of the table with you professionals that have done this, and, that would be the time to talk about them.
I think I've just made one suggestion. Cut 3 more district and make these whole to the schools.
Yeah.
And I guess along those lines, and what Mr. Destin is saying, that if that's something that y'all can work out before Monday night, that's fine. Or if it's something that you'd want to propose in the meeting as to what positions those are, then that would be a place that you could do that. I don't know how else to deal with this issue. It's on the table. I'm assuming we're gonna get a motion, and then we're gonna vote on it. And the only way we can vote is yes or no, or we can amend it. So if you have those ideas, then, bring them in. Let's hear 'em.
And I'd be more than happy to have any conversations prior to Monday. So I'd be more than happy. And just the last thing I would like to say, because I definitely, for those who are watching, those in the audience, and I know where we say go back to the district and cut 3 more, I just wouldn't want there to be a perception out there that we started at the school level. The very first place that we started looking at cuts because of where we are, budget, and as it's been explained to me, the amount of money that's coming in and the amount of money that we are spending, if we stay on this track, this model will not be sustainable. So understanding that, there's some difficult decisions that had to be made, and the first started at the district level, and we have fantastic people at the district level, and of course, some of them are in the audience right now, and they're probably thinking, who knows what they're thinking right now.
Not to diminish them, they're wonderful, but they would be equally wonderful at a school.
No, absolutely. The point being, we absolutely started at the district level to make it, because the leadership-wise, I think it's important to start there.
But the main thing that's driving this is that we've adopted that ESE piece that we looked at last time, right? That's really what's driving this.
So first and foremost, what's driving this is the budget and the
Well,
amount of revenue that we've received over the years, and the current model that we're in. That if
Right.
we continue to go forward in the current model with the revenue that we're receiving from the state of Florida, that would be difficult. Now, the ESE piece is a factor, but the ESE piece is helping us get to where we're doing some good things
Oh,
for
yeah,
our,
I'm not saying
for our
it's not good,
students
yeah.
and for our schools. So I look at that as a blessing, even though it's going to cost some more money, but that is a factor as well that we're having to account for.
And maybe we said it, but how much money are we looking for to meet this anticipated shortfall?
So what would it take to keep those principles, in other words?
Well, how
those
much
3
money we need? How much
Yeah.
money we gotta have to make the budget work the way it is? What are we thinking our shortfall is likely to be? $1 million, $5 million? Or maybe the cavalry will come in. Maybe the legislature will send us a windfall. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I'm waiting on.
Okay, I'm estimating that we need about $5 million.
Okay.
And let me just tell you, I can tell you right off the cuff, $600,000 increase in Florida retirement, and there's nothing we can do about that other than reduce staff. Health insurance, based on past history, it will be probably somewhere around north of 2 million. I'm guessing 2.3, 2.5 million. So right there, you're almost at 3 million just for those 2 items,
Right.
without looking at any other increases or any other initiatives. Now, if the legislature somehow comes out with a budget and, we get $5 million in operational money, then we probably would be okay for another year.
And that's the answer, another year, right?
Yeah, because I mean, it's like
Right.
what I just passed out to you. This is not something that's just happened today. This has been over an 11-year period, and we have, we've continued to face those challenges and make it work. And I would not be a prudent fiscal officer if I just said,
Thank
oh,
you.
we'll make it, we'll worry about it next year, because at some point, the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, just to put it in perspective, Chairman, 300,000 or 400,000 a month,
Yeah.
right?
There you go. Right.
And I'd just like to say, Ms. Callen, you said it without basically saying this. If the dam is leaking, we shouldn't put bubble gum in it. We should fix it right. We need to do. And the general public, if you would just take a moment and reach out to the people we have in Tallahassee and just ask them to properly fund public education, I mean, it would help out a lot. So, but if we don't make a voice, then it's going to continue to be the way it is.
All right, we've talked about it here, and I suspect this might be something we talk about again on Monday night. And you'll see that this item's on consent agenda. And the way it works, if anybody wants to pull it off and pull it to a discussion item, then you can do that. Or it can pass on consent, however you folks want to do it. Okay, so let's go ahead, unless you have something else.
I would like to see it discussed further.
Okay, so we'll go ahead then at this juncture,
I don't
and
feel
we'll pull
comfortable
this item.
voting.
We'll pull this item, and it'll
Okay.
be moved to discussion, okay?
I agree with that.
Yeah, one board member can do it, so
Okay.
anytime there's an item on there, you can do it,
Okay.
okay? All right, 8.14, ITB 19-05, Chemicals for Cooling Towers, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent.
Just out of curiosity, Chairman, did we just have one bidder on that, or was there
Uh, Good question. Mr. Wyndham, thank you.
We did just have one response. For that particular solicitation, we had 39 suppliers notified through our BidNet system, and we had 3 additional suppliers that we notified directly. But we just did get the one
I'm
supplier.
always amazed by that, because it's
Yeah,
$40,000,
and-
$50,000.
Well, one thing that we do, and Steve may can explain more if you need him to, but we're set up a little bit different with the way we handle the chemicals. You know, a lot of times it's a full service deal. We have a person on staff and maintenance that handles a lot of those duties, so we're basically just buying chemicals.
Yeah.
We did, with the one bidder, though, we still want to look and see, one bidder, you want to really make sure you're getting a deal that's worth bringing to you for award, and we are. We're based on comparison of the current numbers that we have. 2 of the 3 items, we went down in pricing. We're also getting 2 items, chemical pump pulsation series and conductivity controller. Not sure what that is, but when those go bad, we're having to buy those as part of this contract. They are now included.
Good,
So we're getting some positive things out of this contract.
thanks.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wyndham and Mr. Destin. All right, moving on to 8.15, tag on bid ITQ 2540-MST locker purchase and service, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.16, tag on bid RFP 16-06, Building Automation Systems, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.17, tag on bid purchase over $25,000, Siemens, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.18, tag on bid purchase over $25,000, Allen J. Fleet Sales, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.19, tag on bid purchase over $25,000, Polar King, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.20, tag on bid purchase over $25,000, Mohawk, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.21, tag-on bid purchase over $25,000, Weatherproofing Technologies Incorporated, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director, Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.22, tag-on bid purchase over $25,000, International Restaurant Distributors, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.23, tag-on bid purchase over $25,000, Dell, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.24, sole source purchase over $25,000, Yale, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.25, service agreement number 19-76, Denise DeCary, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.26, assignment and assumption agreement of the TPM contract from Jacobs L3 to Jacobs/Titan, presented by Dr. Bill Smith, Specialist, Facilities Planning and Maintenance, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.27, sale and disposal of surplus property, presented by Mr. Steve Bolton, Director, Facilities Planning and Maintenance, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.28, Summer Voluntary Pre-Kindergarten Program, VPK, for 2019, presented by Ms. Deborah Hahn, Principal, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.29, Destin High School Charter School application. And after all that discussion about budget, y'all are still here. Presented by Mrs. Sheila Lightborn, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. So let me turn this over to Mr. Chambers so you can move through the process. I see we have a lot of folks here, and I'm sure that there'll be time for them, but
Yes.
go ahead, sir.
And I am going to ask Mr. McGinnis to help me, but the one thing I would say, as you know, what's before you right now is the application process for the charter Destin High School. And I do want to say to the group, I do appreciate how professional you all have been, the communication with our staff. So that is just something that I do very much appreciate. So I thank you.
This process, Mr. Chairman, involves tightly regulated by state law in regard to how we receive, evaluate, and make recommendations on charter school applications. In this case, the proposing group has followed the state prescribed application form. The district staff have followed the state prescribed evaluation instrument, which is provided by the Department of Education, and each of the various departments in the district have evaluated their sections of the application. There was a follow-up session with the applicant to go over any clarifying questions, and those have been submitted. And the next step is for the board to review the application and the recommendation from the superintendent for approval. If you choose to grant the application, then the next process is for the district. We have a 30-day window to prepare and submit to the applicant a proposed charter contract. Once again, DOE provides us with the template for that charter contract. After that process, they receive that draft contract, and they have a window of opportunity then to go through it and to respond to it, and we have an opportunity to negotiate any items or matters that need to be ironed out, and then ultimately a proposed charter contract will be brought back to the school board for final approval. So the issue before you on Monday night and at this workshop today is a review of the application and a recommendation that it be approved. Then we will go into the business of developing the actual contract itself and can go through further negotiations to refine some of those matters in the contract. That will come back here for another public hearing and a final vote by the board. So you're not Monday night approving the actual charter, you're just approving the application that will be used then to develop the charter.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, board members, any questions or thoughts or comment?
Chairman, I
Yes, sir.
I read through the district's review and didn't see anywhere where they had marked that it was inadequate. I've met off and on and periodically with the group that's in Destin working on this. They've done it in a very professional manner. Do they desire an opportunity to make any comments today? I don't think there's a great deal of angst over going forward with this issue at this time.
No, and I would just say too, as having been the principal at Destin Middle School, every single year for almost 6 years that I was there, this idea was brought forward, and we've tried for all of this time to see how that could become a reality. It's just not feasible in the public school world because of our numbers, but I think this is an excellent opportunity to bring forth something like that in that situation, in that neighborhood. So thank you.
And for members of the public, you said you read that document. I know that wasn't a fast read because.
I know there are a lot of pages to that.
There's a lot.
If I remember, there's like 240-some pages. and-
I skimmed it very quickly.
Yeah, well, that still took some time, but anyway, it is attached to the agenda, and so members of the public, they're certainly welcome to take a look at the application itself that we're being asked to vote on Monday night, okay?
I have something that does not set well with me that I'm reading, just to point out, and that's on the executive summary. It reads, we're talking about the reasons 15 years ago that you set out to have this school, and it says, the growing population coupled with an isolated location and deteriorating conditions at neighboring high schools solidified the community's resolve to turn a dream into a reality. I take issue with that deteriorating conditions at neighboring high schools. I think all our high schools are at a very high level, and I don't think that having a Destin high school is a runaway from our current high schools. I think it does fill another need, but I really do take objection to saying deteriorating conditions at neighboring high schools.
I can come and address.
All right, Dr. Rathwell, if you come forward, please.
Please.
Sure. Come on forward. Welcome, Councilwoman.
Thank you. Thank you so much,
Hi.
board, staff, and of course our chairman here and superintendent. My name is Preble Ramswell, and I actually serve as the president of the Destin High School Advisory Board. And yes, I am also on the Destin City Council. But I'm glad you pointed that out. It's funny because I wrote that and then people edited it and it was put in there, and I was reading it again today and I thought, that doesn't sound real good. But the point was, we have read and seen, and many of us have students that have gone through several high schools here, different high schools. And, you know, one of the issues that has arisen is air conditioning issues and flooding, and then different capacity issues. And it's more about infrastructure, certainly not the quality. And, we do know that paper has regularly covered, and we've heard and we've seen in different budget items, different items that do need repair, and there are improvements that are necessary throughout the district. So it does sound like a negative, and I didn't necessarily mean it that way when I wrote it. It was just taking a look at the current conditions and the needs for improvements in those schools, and certainly it relates back to funding and the ability for the district to actually fund a lot of those repairs that are extremely expensive, as we've seen and heard and all regularly live.
So the physical conditions of the schools was one of the motivating factors for you wanting to have a charter school?
I would say it factored in. It was one of the things that we heard from the public that was a concern, and there were other issues, like at Destin Elementary School at a younger level, the fact that there are a lot of portables, and some of them, I guess, aren't grounded. I'm not sure what the proper terminology is, but in storms, they're walking through the rain and things of that nature. And that was just an overall concern that we've heard from people, not necessarily even all in Destin, but across the county. Just different concerns and things that y'all are addressing in time. It just takes time.
Well, I'm hoping that their concern will lead to us getting some money
Right.
so that we can fix those problems. So I
Yeah.
hope those same citizens will rise up and say we need to get another half-cent sales tax in there to fix that. But again,
hear ya.
it doesn't say deteriorating condition, physical conditions. And like I said, we have terrific schools here, already high schools.
Absolutely.
Nothing's deteriorating. We may have some buildings that need to be fixed, but, you know, the education value's not in the building. But I can see those concerns. And like I said, I hope they'll use those concerns to help us out and get something in the future. So thank you for clarifying that.
Absolutely, and I want to thank you all so much for your consideration. This has been a decades-long vision for many people in the community, and I was so honored to be able to help put this particular committee together in 2016 and pull all the numbers and determine feasibility and viability and really reach this point where we are today, where hopefully we're going to see this dream become a reality. So thank you all for your part in that, and I appreciate your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And so I just have a couple of questions, Mr. McInnes, that maybe you can take a look at and advise me on. I've tried to look at the law and those kinds of things, and it may be something that you can report back to us on Monday night. But this will be a charter school that will function relatively independent from this school board. Is that right?
That's
Or
correct.
How does that work? Do they have their own board?
Yes, this organization has already incorporated in the state of Florida as a not-for-profit entity. Their board will manage and oversee the operations of the school. It will be, if granted, it will be chartered by the school board, but they will oversee their own day-to-day operations. Charter schools in the state of Florida have a number of statutes and laws that they're exempted from, and so their operations in some areas will be much different than those that the school board and the school district are bound by. They are not exempted from health and safety regulations, however, and so those still have to be followed just like our district public schools. The plan they have is that if the charter is granted, they will then apply through the IRS for a 501c3 nonprofit designation. So all of that will take place in an organized fashion.
Okay.
They are entitled by state law to FTE allocations for their students, and those things flow through the school district to charter schools, just like,
Okay.
you know, we provide that now. But that's funding they earn based upon their student enrollments. It's not funding, taken from our students. It just comes through the district as somewhat of a fiscal agent. They are required to have audits, and to be audited annually, and those you've seen that charter school audits do come back to the board for your information and review, but you're not in charge of their audit. They just have to submit those back, because obviously we have to be able to monitor the financial strength of their operations over the years, because that'll be a component of the charter contract, is that they have to stay fiscally sound. But yes, it will be an independent operation by an independent board of directors.
All right, and so I looked at this, but I didn't quite understand all the legalese. And it might be something that you'd have to report back to us. But as a corporate entity, then, would a charter be allowed to borrow money, so to speak?
Yes, sir, they can borrow money. I would say this from a financial standpoint. State statute says that a charter school does not have taxing authority. They cannot issue bonds that are secured or supported by the full faith and credit of the state or of the school board.
Right.
So they would have to be doing that in a private situation. Statutes also make it clear, and this is how charters operate in finance, that should they do borrowing, should they have any kind of security on any of their facilities, there has to be an indemnity for the state and the school board against any fiscal liability for that debt. That debt can only be repaid from resources or assets of that nonprofit entity. It does not become a debt of the school district.
That's what I wanted to know. So the school district, school board, would not inherit any debt,
That's
should there
right.
be any. All right. And lastly, just curious, are charter schools subject to public records laws?
Yes, it's my belief that they are, because they also, I believe their boards also operate with notice of their meetings and
Okay.
things of that nature.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, colleagues? Thoughts?
I would just have one observation, Chairman. While the schools are in good shape, the one problem we are facing is overcrowding. Niceville's bursting at the seams.
Right.
So is Crestview.
Right.
We're going to have to address that. This may be, if they're successful, a little bit of a release on the steam.
That's right.
But eventually, we're going to have to figure out what we're going to do with the overcrowding, because we just can't cram any more people into Niceville.
Right, and
We're
we
starting
keep-
lunch at 10 in the morning
And we
now.
keep building. I
Yeah.
mean, we keep adding homes.
That's it. So somewhere in the not very distant future, we're going to have to figure out what we're going to do about that situation. This may give us a relief if they're successful for a little while.
That's right. It was long my idea that, due to that very nature, to start a ninth grade center. Nobody ever asked me, and I'm certainly not able to do that on my own, but having a ninth grade center would have eased that for those high schools that we serve there at Destin Middle. But I think this will be helpful.
Yep.
That was my question, what impact is it going to have on our district on losing students and maybe perhaps losing personnel? We have to hire teachers and other personnel there, so.
I can tell you it will be somewhat of an impact on both of those, because as I was appointed principal at Bruner, right after Liza Jackson opened basically in our backyard, so it will decrease enrollment, which does decrease the need for that number of instructional staff. So that's kind of a neutral if those two things happen in sync.
Mhm.
And those issues will arise in our district in the 2020-21 budget cycle, because they're proposing to open the school in the fall of 2020. And so those will be considerations, and by then, there will be FTE estimates, and those are the things we'll have to work off. Ms. Scallon, of course, would be working on all that. They've provided initial estimates of their early enrollments, but that's the budget cycle in which those considerations would really have to get serious consideration by us. And Mr. Chairman, I can provide further clarification to you on the issue of the public records. Certainly, all of the records and communications between the charter school and the school district are subject to the public records law. I can provide you further information in regard to any of their actual corporate documents, but the bulk of what they are going to be producing are going to be records either to the state or to the school district, and information we're providing back and forth, and clearly all of that will be subject to the public records law.
Well, I can't help but chuckle. I just wish that had been the only kind of request that had been made of me. Okay, so I understand. All right, anything else, colleagues? You good? You good? Well, thank you, folks, for showing up and doing all this work. It was a lengthy document and a lengthy process, and we appreciate that. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and move forward then. 8.29, we did that one. So 8.30, cooperative agreement between the Florida Diagnostic Learning Resource System Fiddlers, FDLRS, FDOE discretionary project in Escambia, Santa Rosa, and Okaloosa counties, submitted by Ms. Melody Summer, Program Director, Exceptional Student Education, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.31, course adoptions for the 2018-2019 school year for Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, Okaloosa Aerospace Academy, presented by Julianne Smith, Secondary Curriculum Specialist, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
I would just like to comment on
Yes, sir.
this course adoption again is just another example of how we're providing these services to our students by offering an aerospace class and preparing our students for those who choose to go into the aerospace field, which we all know is very big around our county. So,
Yes, sir.
Okay, so now moving on to Section 9, Superintendent's Human Resources Recommendations. 9.1, Employees on Administrative Leave, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources. 9.2, Deferred Retirement Option Program, DROP, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources. 9.3, Request to advertise a public hearing for adoption of a new job description For Director, Exceptional Student Education and Student Services, Curriculum and Instruction, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Okay, this is a new position, or this is just changing the job description?
So I apologize, which item?
9.3.
This is the public hearing for a new job description.
So this is
So-
a public, so
Job
job description
description.
for
We
the
already have the position.
2019-20 school year. And this is a position that would be included in that budget.
Okay, so, but we have this position, correct?
No, ma'am.
So we're adding this position, that's part of the ESE?
So it actually,
Piece.
of course, that's the department piece, but it actually would not be, well, it's an add, but it would be a deletion from another area. So it would be a cost-neutral director position. So moving it from one department to another department so as to not add.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe in addition, we could look at someone obtaining the position with the right qualifications, and then that position could be a deletion and a savings, potentially,
That's a possibility.
There you go. Yeah.
just to start the wheels turning a little bit.
So what we're looking at then is to approve a job description for a director. And what I heard the superintendent say, I believe, is that this will be coming to us as a position in the budget for the next fiscal year.
Correct. And I think you've heard me talk a little bit about having someone that would be over student services, over ESC specifically, being responsible for compliance and oversight of that program.
All right. But all we're being asked to do Monday night is approve the job description.
Actually, you're just approving advertising for a public hearing to
Thank you.
adopt the job
Good
description.
clarification.
Oh, okay.
Thank
There you go. All right.
There you go. All right, very good. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so 9.4, request to advertise the public hearing for adoption of revised job description for Assistant Principal 1, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended for approval by the Superintendent.
So the same thing, right?
That's right, for a public hearing. All right, 9.5, request to advertise a public hearing for adoption of revised School Board Policy 07-03, employment conditions for educational support personnel, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Mr. Chairman, as you know, the board and superintendent have been looking at developing some ethical standards to be applied to the support staff, and that's what this change does. It takes and incorporates ethical standards that are in place for instructional staff and other employees, and it's just a policy change that needed to be made to ensure that we have those same standards being implemented among those employees.
Very good.
And I would like to add one other piece. So you know we've made a lot of, over the course of the last year, we put a lot of things in place as it pertains to items like this. So this is another effort to put some good policies in place for our employees. So I'm very proud to see that we have this coming before you, and that we'll have this in place. So I appreciate that.
Good thing.
Excellent. All right, so 9.6, cleared certification requirements and issuance of contracts for the 2018-2019 school year, presented by Ms. Karen Peak, Program Director of Professional Services, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.7, out-of-field report for the 2018-2019 school year, presented by Ms. Karen Peak, Program Director of Professional Services, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.8, personnel recommendations, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.9, employment separations, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.10, employee transfers, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.11, reinstatement reimbursement of sick leave due to line of duty illness, injury, medical examination, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.12, leave without pay, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. All right, moving on to discussion agenda. We already have the one item that will be moved there. Section 11, construction program owners representatives business, 11.1. That would be a status report. Mr. Destin, do you want to give one today or Monday or both?
I'll just give you a very short,
Okay.
we've spent a lot of time looking at security. You'll get to see some of that in the closed session,
All right.
and I look forward to
Thank you.
your input on it.
Thank you for doing that. All right. then. All right, so Section 12, information technology, no business there. Section 13, Mr. Attorney, your business.
So report today.
All right, thank you. Superintendent, you got some out-of-state field trips, and you may have other business. Go ahead, please.
So a couple things I do want to make you aware of. So as you know, student safety is paramount in terms of what we're doing. I am proud to say that we have had some conversations with our sheriff, as you know. And we do have a meeting coming up where we will discuss some safety and security items for our district. But I'd also like to say one of the things that we're in discussion about is this summer having some safety discussions, continued safety discussions with our administrators, even looking into the proposal of having some safety discussions with our parents and our teachers and staff. I think the more that we can get out good, accurate information as pertains to the safety of our students, I think that's critical. Another area that we are going to look at, I think, as we know, mandatory reporting is something that we are statutorily required to do, and in our county, I think that is happening in this current climate. As you know, we have a process with other entities on how we deal with that. We have a process with DCF and we have a process with the Sheriff's Department. And right now, I think in our county, and I do want to say it this way, and I've said it a number of times, I think the vast majority of our teachers, of our support staff, of our administrators are doing the right thing each and every day for our students, for their families. Admin leave is a byproduct of this process that we have. So one of the things that I do, that we are going to do is we're going to have a meeting with the sheriff and kind of talk about where we are in this process and how this process impacts the school district and how this process impacts the Sheriff's Department. So I just do want to say that we're going to have that type of a meeting coming up, and just reiterating the fact that the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of our teachers, of our support staff, of our principals are doing the right thing each and every day for our students. And that's all I have.
All right, all right. All right, thank you, sir. And so now we go to board members' announcements and requests for information. That's section section 15. And so, Ms. Vanchek, how about if I start with you this afternoon?
Thank you.
This morning.
Yeah. Well, got to do some fun things lately. Last Friday, I was over at Richburg School and got to take part in Shirley Godboll's culinary. And we had a chef, Teresa Cullors from Italy. And I was really put on the spot. You can ask my husband. I have not won any awards in cooking. But she said, go ahead, Miss Board Member, and put on an apron. And so I did. And I learned how to make gnocchis, and it turned out pretty good. Although I cheated, I watched the student beside me as he was doing his part. But it's great for us to have those experiences for those students, and I appreciate Miss Godbold working that out to get that in there. Then later on, I got to go to Kenwood Elementary. They celebrated their 50th anniversary. That was a lot of fun seeing that. And on a personal note, they had a film that was done on teacher Mrs. Libby McSheehy. The McSheehys are longtime educators in our district. Mr. McSheehy was a principal, and it was a great story about a former student who had contacted Mrs. McSheehy last year about the book Where the Red Fern Grows. He is now judge and so forth over in South Carolina, and was able to contact her. So they debuted this film that Miss McSheehy's daughter Robin did. She works for CBS News. So it was a really neat thing. So these are the great things that I think both of those have been covered by the Daily News. So I hope people are seeing some exciting things that we get to do. So it's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Evancheck. Dr. Kelly?
And I would just echo how wonderful the visiting chef program was. And with Ms. Godboll's impending retirement, I would encourage us to try to keep that program going there, because
Yeah.
those students learn so much, not just a life skill for them for how to provide nutrition for themselves and how to cook safely, but they learn some industrial skills too that are employability skills from functioning in that program. So I would hope that we could continue that even after she retires. And just tag on to say that being a part of the Auntie Mitchell's honor ceremony was quite an event, and we were able to shake hands and congratulate so many of our students. But along that line, understanding that the parents and grandparents and community members who supported those students throughout their whole career deserve part of that credibility and that kudos too. And I see some of those parents in this audience, so thank you to those for bringing us such exceptional students and allowing us to work with them. And then tonight, if you're free, consider attending Ruckel's Sweet Choral Experience tonight, 6 p.m. at Ruckel.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Mr. Bryant?
I just have a few things, and I too had the opportunity to go to Richburg School to visit with the chef that was from Italy, and unlike Ms. Evancheck, I did not get in there and cook or bake or do any of that, because I would have burned the school down probably. So we don't want that to happen. But seriously though, it was awesome, because she actually came from Italy for a week to stay out here, and she volunteered her time. And I agree with Dr. Kelly. That's a program that I would very much hope we would consider continuing for those students at Richburg. It is a very vital part of their success in life. I will also say that the Auntie Mitchell Awards is just a fabulous event. And I was the one that was chosen to do the closing comments that night, and I forgot to mention two very special people who helped put this together, and that's our dynamic duo of Mary and Jan. They did a great job of getting everything together. You know, if you saw how many medals were up on that stage, and they have to put them all in order, and, you know, there might have been a child who wasn't on that list, and, you know, that was up on the stage. So they're all scrambling around, but they did a fabulous job out there. And another thing real quick, we talk about social media and the issues that we have within the schools with your students. Up in Crestview on Tuesday, this is open to the public, at Hub City Smokehouse Barbecue, the Sheriff's Department is going to have somebody, one of their people from cybersecurity, their division. They're going to have a program there, what's called Educate Your Selfie, and this is only going to be open to parents. It's not going to be open to children. This is going to give you an opportunity to find out how you can better monitor your social media for your students. And I think in today's climate, it's more important than ever that as parents we do our part to monitor our children's cell phone activities. It tells you that when I go to Laurel Hill School, for instance, and a second grader had a better phone than I did, that tells you the kind of technology that they have in their hands. So, and also on a final note, we were talking about the budget, and parents from the Destin High School Initiative, it is always a pleasure to have people who are passionate about what they believe in take an initiative to try to get something fixed and do it, you know, as professionally as you have done. I'm a supporter of school choice, always have been, but I also believe in public education, and I think it's up to us as a society to make an investment. And we talk about cutting. We're trying to manage. That's, you know, cutting is, you know, you say it like it is. It's like you see blood going everywhere. But we're trying to manage that budget as best as we can. But we can only do what we get from our friends in Tallahassee. And I know they have a lot on their plate, but I think it's one subject that we all can agree on, is that public education is still a vital part of the success of our county, of our country. And if we don't properly fund it, then, like you said, we're we're just going to make it harder for ourselves in the future. And I don't know about you, I'm 50, and these kids that are coming up, they're going to be taking care of me, and I want to make sure we give them everything that we can to take care of me, because I can tell you my kids will probably not put me in the best assisted living facility. So I'm depending on your kids to do that. So thank you, Dr. White.
Yes, sir. All right, Mr. Destin?
Well, I missed the Italian cooking demonstration, but I have been to several. And
bet.
I've eaten enough of their pastries to put on quite a bit of weight. The program is a wonderful thing to behold, and I want to congratulate Ms. Godbold. They're big shoes to fill, and we need to start looking to see how we're going to go forward with it, because those kids are getting jobs, and they're learning life skills, and it's a really wonderful thing to watch.
Thank you, Mr. Destin.
And by the way, the facility there that you've helped on, fabulous,
Yep.
fabulous.
I was going to say, they were using the 3 compartment seats, so thank you very much.
I'm glad that, they need to do that when they go to work.
That's right.
Well, I too want to thank Mary and Jan for doing a great job on the award ceremony that we had, the A&T Mitchell Awards. And I do want to add that, Mr. Chambers, I felt like that you were the star of the program as you adorned those 1,000 students with their ribbons. And I was glad it was you that was performing that activity. So you did a good job with that, and thank you. That's really all I have here, unless the superintendent or Mr. McInnes, we have any further business. Board members, anything else? All right, just flipping through the agenda, I don't see anything regarding, well, we do have the public notice, but we've taken care of all that. So since no one has anything else, this meeting is adjourned.